Part 2 of the Strategic Level Risk Assessment for Fire Behavior Specialists is Roles, Responsibilities, and Relationships. Let's look at how risk assessments are used in wildfire management. Risk assessments are applied at all levels of wildfire decision-making, from the individual firefighter on the ground facing changing environmental conditions to the national office leaders of the fire management agencies weighing limited budgets against increasingly active fire seasons. Risk assessments are done at multiple levels. Here are a few examples. An agency administrator asks a SOPL and an LTAN to conduct a risk assessment to determine the probability that the fire, which is the hazards element, will reach the nearby community, which is the value. They might use a matrix like this. Or a safety officer conducts a risk assessment of the proposed action plan for tomorrow's operational period and determines there's a high probability the hazard trees, which is the hazard, will put Division Alpha's firefighters, the value, at risk. Or a firefighter in the field could conduct a risk assessment and determine there is a high probability that the snag, the hazard, will affect his life, the value, if he works in the vicinity of that snag. In each of these examples, the fire personnel are evaluating the probability that the hazard will affect the value in order to reach a conclusion about risk. These risk assessments are interconnected. Information gathered in one risk assessment can result in changing another risk assessment, creating feedback loops. For example, if a firefighter refuses an assignment after following the Incident Response Pocket Guide or IRPG risk management process, the day's plan for that division might need to be reevaluated, and tactics might have to be adjusted. This might also affect the probability of the fire reaching values of concern. The risk assessments we cover in this lesson are for the strategic level of wildfire decision-making, where decisions are made on strategies to manage an individual wildfire. Specifically, we'll look at the relative risk assessment and the extended risk assessment and the role the LTAN and FBAN will play in contributing to these decision support tools. For clarification of terminology, strategic level risk assessment is an overall term for risk assessments used to make decisions about strategy at the incident level. These include the extended risk assessment and the relative risk assessment, which are specific products. Strategies broadly describe a general direction or method to meet incident objectives and requirements. Examples of strategies used on wildfire incidents include full perimeter control, point protection, confine contain, and monitoring. Risk assessments aid in the selection of appropriate strategies by anticipating where the fire might move, what it might impact, and the severity of that impact. Risk assessments can help in identifying resource allocation priorities based on probabilities and consequences, and determine which strategies and tactics might be the most successful in response to predicted fire behavior. Risk assessments are crucial in explaining the rationale for the strategic decision and providing transparency in wildfire decision-making. Let's look at the different people who are involved in creating these risk assessments at the strategic level and what they're responsible for contributing. The agency administrator, sometimes referred to as the line officer, holds the primary responsibility for strategic decisions. It's the agency administrator that officially approves the decision document with its strategic direction and supporting documentation. However, gathering the information about the wildfire, analyzing the weather and fire behavior, identifying the values at risk, and making an effective decision on strategic alternatives often requires more time and technical skill than a single person can contribute. The agency administrator relies on the technical expertise and experience of others to formulate a sound decision based on current and predicted conditions. The host unit staff provides invaluable input based on local experience, pre-planning activities, and specialized knowledge. Examples of local staff that should be involved in a strategic risk assessment include the fire management staff, wildlife biologists, cultural resource specialists, hydrologists, silviculturists, and recreation specialists. The Strategic Operational Planner, or SOPL, is a National Wildfire Coordinating Group, or NWCG position with the ability to coordinate the development of a strategic risk assessment and use this risk assessment to evaluate alternative courses of action to meet the objectives of the incident. The SOPL usually takes the lead in gathering information about the values component of the risk assessment. The Wildland Fire Decision Support System, or WFDS, automatically provides a planning area values inventory based on the delineated planning area and national and local data layers. This must be supplemented with input from local experts and stakeholders. Maps, GIS layers, all create a complete inventory of values at risk. The SOAP will then use this information about predicted fire behavior to propose strategies that will meet incident objectives and mitigate the risk to values. Some SOPLs are capable of completing a long-term fire behavior analysis for relatively non-complex wildfire incidents on their own. But on a complex, long-duration wildfire, a SOPL is most effective when paired with a fire behavior specialist, either a long-term analyst, a fire behavior analyst, or a geospatial fire analyst with geospatial analysis skills. The fire behavior specialist can provide technical expertise for evaluating the fire hazard and probability of fire spread, and take the lead in developing the hazard and probability sections of the risk assessment. In the next sections, we'll demonstrate what that would look like for both the relative risk assessment and an extended risk assessment.